Hey students, I'm Mr. Case and you probably know me as your friendly neighborhood ceramics teacher, but today I'm going to put on my Anchorman pants and bring you the news on something that's really important to me and to our school. So come on, let's go to the news studio.
Here's the news, coming to you every hour on the hour.
Hi students, this is Eagle 4 News and I'm your host, Alex Case. Today we're going to be talking about something that is super important to me and super important to our school as a whole, which is social and emotional health. Specifically, we're going to be talking about our Panorama survey results. So the Panorama survey is the one that asks you questions like, do you feel like you belong at school? Do you feel like you're respected? How often do you worry about your grades? Things like this. So this is something that we've taken multiple times. Is it a perfect survey? Definitely not. Some of the questions are worded a little bit oddly. Some things are kind of confusing, but does that mean it's totally worthless? No. It has some really, really valuable uses. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper into that. And first of all, I personally think it's really awesome that our district is caring about social and emotional health at all. So even though our tool isn't perfect, it still is a good tool and it can do some important things for us. So I know sometimes this can feel like it's just another thing to do, but it's actually really important that you take it seriously. And the reason why is this. So we've taken it multiple times and it kind of seems like sometimes, I've already done this, I already know the answers, I already know where I'm at. If you're pretty consistent on your social and emotional health, then that's really good. And so you might have similar answers to the previous time. But this is kind of like when you go to the doctor and you have a checkup and they say, all this stuff seems good, but this is a little bit different from the last time you were in here. So we want to take a look on that. We'll kind of keep an eye on that and make sure that it's still all good. But if we run into any issues, then we're going to address that. So we take this consistently so that we have a baseline so we can kind of compare against where things are at. And we can also see trends both in your own personal data, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and we can see trends across the school as a whole. So if we see, everybody in the school is having a hard time coping with anxiety, then we know that's something that as a school we should address. Now I can hear you asking, Mr. Case, I hear you saying this is important, but is it really important? Is it more important than studying for my science test? Is it more important than doing my math homework? And the short answer is yes. The long answer is extra yes. Because social and emotional health is a really serious topic. It's not easy to talk about, but it is important. And so we're going to get a little bit real here. We're going to get a little bit deep. And so thanks for coming with me on this and just recognizing and giving me an ear as you're listening to why this is important. So for me personally, social and emotional health is super important. Over the past 5 years, I know 2 people who've committed suicide, 1 person who's died of an overdose. My grandpa has passed away. I know of a colleague who died unexpectedly from getting strep and it moved into his bloodstream. And then I know someone who died in a drunk driving accident. And so although some of these are social and emotional health related, all of them are a really emotionally heavy circumstance that my friends and my family have had to kind of carry with us as we go about our daily lives moving forward from that. Now, I know I'm not the only one who brings in some heavy, serious emotional stuff. For one, we're all living under the shadow of a global pandemic. Now, for you, maybe that's something that you think about a lot and it really stresses you out, or maybe something it's not really in the forefront of your mind, but it is still another level of stress that you're carrying with you. So we have that. I know that some of you might be going through a difficult divorce with your parents, and that breakup is not looking very good. You might be dealing with the aftermath of that, where you're separated from your siblings. You might not have made that choir or that team or the musical that you tried out for that you've been working really hard to make it to, and that can be really heavy and really discouraging. Maybe it's something like anxiety, maybe it's something like depression, maybe it's something like a really difficult medical diagnosis for you. Maybe it's something that is just like the pressures of sports, the overwhelming workload that you're at, either from school or from work. These all have really heavy emotional tolls on us. And even though this list kind of goes on and on and on, and these examples illustrate my point really well, that's not why I selected these examples. I selected these examples because I know real students at Olathe North are actually going through each of these different circumstances. And that is pretty heavy and can be really difficult. The reality is that each of these stressors adds an additional layer of tension and stress to our lives. And so the experiences that I went through definitely created kind of a heavy load that I was carrying with me. And I had to process through each of those kind of as they happened. Maybe you haven't experienced loss in the same way that I have. And in fact, I really hope that you haven't had to deal with that yet. But even then, life is still tough. That's just a part of where we're at. And it's important to take some time every once in a while to kind of check in with yourself, see where you're at. And sometimes we don't like to acknowledge this. I think our society doesn't do a great job of saying it's okay to have a tough season, but life can be really hard. I'll say that again. Your life can be really hard, but you are really valuable even though your life can be really difficult. If no one told you today that you're amazing even if your life is difficult. I honestly am constantly super impressed with our student body. You guys are super kind, you're super resilient, you persevere through difficulties really, really well, and I'm constantly impressed with the adults that you guys are growing into being. But even with all that, life can still be stressful. So as a school and as a staff, we really want to help you in the best ways that we can. Now, one of the ways that we do that is we try to build strong relationships with you. I hope every one of you has at least one teacher that you can go to when life is tough and you don't know who to turn to. That could be, that positive adult influence in your life. I know our staff is really caring and they care about our students a lot. But if you don't feel like you have a teacher who you can come talk to when things are difficult, come talk to me. My room is 603. It's down at the end of the art hallway next to the auditorium. I would love to chat with you. Another way that we like to help our students is by looking at some of the social and emotional data. So we do this kind of in two facets. One facet is we look at it broadly, like I said, across the whole school. And so we take everybody's results, we compile them all together, and this is where we can see okay, so we see the whole school is struggling with coping with anxiety, maybe. And so that's something that we'll take a look at a little bit deeper in as a staff on some of our professional development days when we're in meetings and you get the day off. But you might think about this a little bit like a weather report. And so when we look at the weather, we know we are seeing a specific situation for a specific amount of time, and then we'll have to check the weather again later to see what else is happening and how things change. So kind of to illustrate that point, if you checked the weather last Thursday, it was 60, it was sunny, the weather was awesome. If you wore the same thing last Thursday and yesterday when it snowed, you wouldn't be really prepared, you wouldn't really be responding to what's actually happening in the world around you, and you wouldn't be responding to that in an effective way, right? You'd be freezing because it's snowing and gross. But you have to check in consistently to see, okay, last Thursday it was this Tuesday it's this, next Saturday it's going to be that. And so we check in with the weather multiple times with high frequency to see how that changes and what's going on so that we can be prepared. In the same way, we take this panorama survey multiple times with high frequency so that we can see a check-in of what's going on in this season, how can we be prepared, how can we address some of these situations that are happening. So even though you've taken this survey before, I hope that you continue to go through it and really just give a little bit of thought to each of those answers. As you take it more time, you're going to kind of know what the questions are on the test, and that's kind of the point. We want those questions to be consistent so that when something changes up, we know, oh, that's something that we should be looking into. So like I said, broadly, this is kind of like a weather report where we check in on what's the weather in our school and what's going on. Now, because you are intelligent students and you're caring individuals, we wanted to give you some of the data also so that you kind of know what's going on. So we're going to give you our school weather report and kind of our check-in broadly across the board for what the weather looks like emotionally in our school. So to do that, I'm going to send you over to my really good friend. I like him a lot. He's our Eagle 4 weatherman, meteorologist, Alex Case. Over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Alex. Eagle 4 meteorologist Alex Case here, reporting in with the social and emotional weather in our schools. As you can see, Olathe North is facing a high pressure zone which has some high levels of anxiety and also a system with low senses of belonging. So let's take a closer look as we zoom in on this high anxiety front. As we zoom in, we can see that we have some overall student social and emotional data about their self, leading to this high anxiety front. Their social awareness and grit are in the mid 60s and mid 50s, but as we get to later in the week, we can see temperatures dropping into the high 40s, and finally at the end of the week, really dropping below that freezing temperature for coping with anxiety. So let's take a closer look at that coping with anxiety piece. For coping with anxiety, we have some particular questions that give us some insight into what conditions we might see with this coping with anxiety. As we get into it, we can see that students are not super stressed about how other students are liking them at school. They're not super worried about what other students think. We have some fairly favorable conditions there. The real concern comes in here in the middle of the system, where we see students very stressed about how well they're doing in their classes. How often do they worry about their grades? Now let's take a little bit of a closer look at those two pieces. First off, worrying about their grades. So as we take a look at this question, we can see the question is, how often do you worry about grades? Now the answers are almost always, frequently, sometimes, once in a while, or almost never. To me, this question is worded a little bit oddly. I was a pretty good student in school. I was super competitive with my friends and my girlfriends, so I would have said I'm almost always worried about my grades because I wanted better grades than my friends. But this is uncertain about how students are interpreting this question. For me, it was not a sense of stress, but for students it may be. So let's add some additional data in here to see if we can get some more insight into this particular question. Let's look at how stressed do you get about doing well in your classes. Now we can see that this also has a not super favorable response rate. So the question, again, how stressed do you get about doing well in your classes? We can see that 30% extremely stressed, 34% quite stressed. Taken together, 2/3 of our students, 64% are either extremely stressed or quite stressed about how well they're doing in their classes. So we can see that this is going to lead to some unfavorable conditions outside with our students. Now, as we back up a little bit, we can also see that there's another area of concern here in the South where we see lots of stress about things outside of school and worry about things outside of school. So let's take a closer look at this outside of school piece. As we look at these two questions together, we can see that about 1/3 of our students, 11% and 23%, are extremely or quite stressed about how things are going outside of school. We can also see that, again, about 1/3 of our students, possibly the same third, are almost always or frequently worried about things outside of school. Now, with this worry, with this high sense of anxiety, we can see that this is going to lead to some fairly unfavorable conditions with our students. We might see some foggy focus, we might see some slippery memory, we might see some icy attention spans. So these are things to watch out for with this particular system. Now simultaneously, we have another system that is developing with our high anxiety system, and that's a low sense of belonging. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at that. Here we have our social and emotional data about school overall. School safety, looking pretty good. Teacher-student relationships at 53%. Now this is actually quite important, and we will come back to our teacher-student relationships at 53% in just a moment, so plug that in your brain. We also have 40% favorable responses on student relationships, followed by dropping into some lower levels of sense of belonging and a lower level of cultural awareness and action. Now, this cultural awareness and action piece is actually a new piece for Panorama, so we don't have a ton of data on that. That'll be something that we dig into a little bit more in the future, but for now, we're going to take a stronger focus on sense of belonging. So let's take a look as we zoom in at this sense of belonging. Now, as we look at these questions, we can see how well do people at your school understand you as a person, 26%. How connected do you feel to the adults at your school, 22%. How much respect do students in your school show you, 50%. How much do you matter to others at this school, 31%. And how much do you feel like you belong at this school, 52%. Now, we have a couple of pretty favorable responses here, either 52% for feeling like they belong, 50% for feeling like students respect each other. Those are both pretty good. Those are fairly positive. In the middle, how much do you matter to others at this school? Students not necessarily feeling like they matter a ton to others at their school, so that's something to keep in mind and look out for. Students not feeling like they're super understood as a person overall at their school, only 26% responding favorably there. So the other one, 22%, feeling connected to the adults at your school. Now this is really important if we think back to that other piece of data where we had 53% feel like they have good relationships with teachers at their school, but only 22% feel connected. So here we have a difference between the relationships are there, but the connection piece is not. So these are leading to some additional lack of belonging for our students at our school. This is kind of where we're at. You can see some of these conditions. So to sum up for our weather report, we have a high level of anxiety, a low sense of belonging, and those are going to create some of those really negative conditions for our students. Foggy focus, icy attention spans, slippery memory, all of these things are things to watch out for on your commute to and from school and in the Olathe North area. Now back to you, Alex.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. It's awesome to get a check-in for our school and see what things are looking like across the board. It's great to understand how many of our students are feeling. But if things that are going on in our school don't line up with what you personally are struggling with, that might not have been super informative for you. Maybe your situation is different from the big picture here at North. Well, that's okay. So I have some instructions for you for how to see your own results on Student View so that you can know where you are trending and how your results look. So in Student View, on the left side, if you scroll down to the bottom, there's a section that says Test Results. If you click on this, you'll see reading and math scores at the top on a line graph, and then below that line graph, you'll see what your specific results are from Panorama. Now, on this chart, there's a couple things to look at. You'll notice that you have scores that are in a few different categories. So we have coping with anxiety, emotional regulation, grit, and social awareness. Coping with anxiety is like handling stress. Emotional regulation is how in control you are of your own emotions. Grit is your ability to push through difficult situations or struggles that you're facing. And social awareness is kind of like how you get along with others and how you interact with others and things like that. The maximum number of points that you can have in any category is 5. And the higher the score, the healthier you are in that category. So for example, for coping anxiety, if you have a higher score, maybe like a 4.3, 4.5, something like that, that means you are good at coping with anxiety. When you get stressed, you know what to do about it. A low score is the opposite. So a 1 is a low score. When you get stressed, you maybe haven't learned what the best coping mechanisms are for you at this point, and you're still trying to figure that out. So that might be why you have a low coping with anxiety score. Now, an important thing to remember is that these scores are descriptive, not prescriptive. So what that means is they describe where you were at on a specific day at a specific time. They don't prescribe or forecast or tell you what you have to be moving forward. So you can get better at these things as you work at them, but if you look at your data, you'll also notice that you have multiple scores for each category. So you might have different scores for the different days that you took the test. If you're a junior or a senior, you'll probably have a number of scores. If you are a freshman or a sophomore, you might not have as many, and that's okay. You'll continue to build your scores over time. So a little bit of change is pretty typical in these scores. So say you have like a 4.5 and then a 4.3 and then a 4.4. That's going up and down just a little bit, but it's not fluctuating a ton. It might have been just, one day you were a little bit more stressed because of a test or something like that. But in general, those are pretty much the same. So that's what you would expect. But if you have mostly one score, so say we have like 3.7, 4, 3.8, 4.1, but then one score that's like a 2.3, that's kind of like an anomaly. So that seems like that's a little bit weird. Maybe the day that you took that test, your situation was that, you left your shoes at home and you were at school barefoot and that was really stressing you out. I don't know. Something crazy happened. It really tanked your score. Maybe you got into a breakup with your significant other. Maybe you didn't sleep well, something like that. You didn't take the test well, and that was causing some extra stress. So you might have one that's like an outlier. So if that's the case, but then your scores bump back up, that's still pretty good. It's okay to have some really stressful days. What you really want to be kind of focusing on and looking at and being aware of is if you feel like you have a bunch of high scores and then you consistently have a bunch of low scores. So that might be, coping with anxiety, you're stressed, or you're doing pretty good with stress, you're doing pretty good with stress, you're doing pretty good with stress, and then you get really stressed out for a number of different tests. Now, that could indicate a couple of different things. That's when you started taking a harder course load, and that's good for you, but it's stressing you out a lot. So you would want to think back, okay, why are these scores lower at this point? Is there something that is going on there? Is that something that I need to address? And the answer might be yes, the answer might be no. But this is where some of that personal reflection comes in on your own personal scores, so you can see, what's going on here. As you're thinking about that, just one thing that's kind of good to know is those scores are organized by the date that they were taken on the test. And so you have one score for each category on that day, and then you have one score for the same categories but on the next day. So you need to kind of look for all the areas where it says coping with anxiety, compare those scores, all the areas where it says grit, compare those scores, that sort of thing. This is a really good opportunity to reflect on your own situation, think about how you are doing socially and emotionally. Hopefully you're doing really well. And if you are, that's awesome. For most seasons of our life, we do pretty all right. But sometimes we're not okay, and that's okay too. If that's you right now, you might want to reach out to your counselor or a trusted teacher or to me or to a friend and really think about, why are things stressful? And if you need to ask for help, that is a good time to do it. This can help us catch when we need to be asking for help before we get to a breaking point. So for me, I am very self-sufficient. I like to do things on my own, and I usually go until I hit a really big wall and everything explodes and everything in my life is breaking all around me. And then I ask for help. Our goal with this is that you'd be able to catch those things before you get to that point. And it turns out your life's a lot better when you ask for help early rather than when it's too late. So finally, thanks for giving me your attention and for taking this seriously. We'll take the test again on Friday. So as you take that, I hope some of this sticks in your brain. Also, take a look at your scores. You might want to think about, graphing out your scores over time so you can kind of see that visually. I'm an arts teacher. That's what I would do. That would be great for me. But that is something for you to think about. Remember, you are valuable. You are awesome. Take care of yourself and keep being awesome.